Well, hey, welcome back to another episode of the Downline podcast. My name is Jamie Trussell. I have the privilege of serving Downline Ministries and as lead pastor at Redeemer Dripping Springs outside of the Austin, Texas area. And at Downline, through this podcast, we hope to help people faithfully walk with Jesus while pouring their lives into others. And I'm joined with someone today that I really admire, I've learned a ton from over the years, and he's one of our regular teachers in our Downline Institute, Sam Shaw. Sam, thanks for being with us.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Really is.
Hey, for those who may not be as familiar with you in our audience, give us a couple minute kind of background and introduction to yourself and your family and what you're up to these days.
Sure. My wife, Ruthie, and I have been married 51 years. We served as missionaries in the Dominican Republic, had a terrible car accident. We were all airlifted out, brought back, have 4 kids. We have now have 10 grandkids.
Mm.
But we were brought back, and after a couple of years, realized we would not be able to return because of injuries in my wife. So we've served churches in New Mexico, Texas, Oklahoma, and Tennessee. And 14 years ago, started a church called the Orchard Church in the Memphis area. And after 10 years, retired from that to allow the next pastor the freedom to spread his wings without me being there. And so since then, I've served as an interim pastor in Texas, Montana, and now in Little Rock.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's funny, you were actually an interim pastor in my wife's hometown there in Longview, Texas. What was that? About a year ago or so, you were still doing
About
that?
a year and a half ago, and was there 2 years. And boy, we saw the Lord do some amazing things at that church. They were struggling with the loss of two pastors over
Mm.
time, and it's exciting to see what the Lord does. I love being an interim pastor because if I really mess up, the next guy looks good. And if and if I do a decent job, well, the next guy can build on that. So
Yeah.
I wondered, why didn't I do this sooner?
Yeah, I know, right? Well, I mean, it's hard to be traveling to a new place every couple years if you got a family and kids and all that.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know if I ever met your in-laws or not, but fell in love with Longview. Just
Hmm.
boy, wonderful people there, and they made me an honorary citizen of Texas.
Oh, that's
Uh,
hilarious.
Church, it yeah. Edwin Buckaroo's Congress of New Texans. It's a spoof, and it's absolutely hilarious. And then they gave me a pair of cowboy boots when I left.
Oh, there you go. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, probably some Tacovas, so you could take them.
they
Yeah,
were.
take them with you.
That's right.
Uh, so Sam, you've taught a lot of stuff for us in Downline over the years, but I think when I was executive director, and even this year, you have taught the Book of Nehemiah for us. Which
Yeah,
one of the things, and I've got 5 people in our church out here going through Downline this year, which is really exciting.
that's
And one of
good.
the things that I've loved and one of the things that they echoed is how you can take Nehemiah and make it so applicable and so pragmatic in and through just our daily walks, especially leadership. What is it that you love? Just kind of big picture question about teaching Nehemiah or kind of your big takeaways from that book.
Yeah, I personally have learned so much from Nehemiah about such things as how to handle discouragement, how to handle opposition, how to handle anger,
Mm,
how to handle success without it going to my head or overstepping my privileges. He really has taught me how to motivate people,
mm,
especially folks who are discouraged,
mm,
because what he enabled people to do, what the Lord used him for, was to equip and enable a group of discouraged, defeated people to do something they absolutely thought was impossible, had not been done for 140 years.
mm, mm.
So
What
personally, I just learned so much.
Starting with and just backing up on something you mentioned, uh, I think how to deal with discouragement in a God honoring and effective way would resonate with a lot of people. What are specifically from Nehemiah your takeaways in that arena?
Not only was he attacked verbally, and there was a threat of physical attack, but the people were mocked and scorned. There were enemies who were making fun of them, calling them feeble. They said, "What you're doing is not good enough. You're not spiritual enough. It's not going to last." And Nehemiah approached that, as he did everything, by prayer. First of all, there are 11 prayers in Nehemiah, some short. The longest prayer in all the Bible is found in chapter 9. And then he did things like very practical things like encourage people to get their eyes on the greatness of God. He
Mm,
encouraged them to work with their families to get together to protect what was going on by being there with their families. He encouraged them when you feel like you're really sinking, call out. We'll all come and join you there. So he built
mm,
this sense of community among the people, and he projected a vision. The other thing he did was he set a personal example. If I could summarize Nehemiah as a leader, he was a leader by example.
mm.
In all of the work that they did, he never took off his clothes. His men with him they didn't take advantage of all the bennies that come from being a successful leader. The man was just focused, and he would not quit. And I think the fact that perseverance and commitment on his part just led the people to feel, well, there is hope. Maybe we can do this.
Mm. Well, I mean, we think about men and women who are discipling others or pouring their lives into others. Certainly, helping people navigate discouragement is going to be a big part of that.
Yeah.
And if we look at either I'm meeting with a young man or maybe a lady's meeting with a younger lady and they're incredibly discouraged, is Nehemiah a place you'd take them?
I think I would. I think I would encourage them to read Nehemiah. And Nehemiah is it's his personal journal.
Hmm.
So what we're reading are words that he wrote down. And I think as he went along, as he was praying and working, I think he was learning on the job. I really do. And I think if someone just followed his example, made a journal and began to write down, this is what God is teaching me, and realize a lot more prayers are being answered than we're conscious of because we tend to forget, our memories are short. And write your prayers as Nehemiah did. I think there's a real benefit in doing that. So I would encourage, I've been doing that for, oh golly, for 20 or so years. I read at one time out of Psalm 90 where it says, teach us to number our days, that we
Mm,
can apply our heart to wisdom. And I
sure.
realized I'm not doing that. So I began keeping a journal. And for me to go back through and to look at some of the things that I wrote, it's tremendous encouragement. It
Yeah.
really is.
No, that's a great word. I was thinking about a quote I heard the late Dr. Tim Keller say years and years ago. I think he was speaking at Beeson, maybe at a chapel, but he made the point that at least in pastoral ministry, if most pastors are given the choice between prayer and preparation, they'll land on preparation every time.
Without question.
Yeah, without question. But even thinking through that in the book of Nehemiah, what is the interplay? Because here's what I love about him. He's quick to pray, but he also doesn't sit around waiting for this like mystical, I'm just going to do nothing. And there's this prayer action rhythm that he undertakes. And I mean, I meet lots of people where, like myself, prayer needs to be much more uh, permeated through what I do. But then there's this other side of people where it's like, well, we just need to pray and wait on the Lord, and He'll show us the way. How do you navigate that interface of prayer and action?
Boy, it's a balance. Obviously, he doesn't do anything without praying, but he does a whole lot more than just pray.
Hmm,
Uh, what struck me as I was reading back through it again is he got clarity on what he needed to do by praying.
hmm,
I mean, lots of times in my own life, I'm not sure how to pray, and I know the Holy Spirit is helping me in that. But he spent 4 months praying and doing some fasting in order to come to the one thing that had to happen for him to
hmm,
jump into action. And I think
hmm.
sometimes we say a brief prayer, we don't get an answer, we launch into something and then fall flat on our face. But he got clarity. And so many times in my life when I've not been sure what to do, in prayer, I get a sense of direction and clarity. And that's what Nehemiah did when he said that long prayer in chapter 1, and he ends it by saying, "Give me success in the
Yeah,
eyes of this king." He prays for success, but everything hinges on that one thing, and it was through
hmm,
prayer that he came to that clarity. So, and then he plans. That's the other thing. He not
yep,
only prays, he goes in. The king says, "How long are you going to be gone? What do you want?" And
yep.
Nehemiah has it in his mind. Uh, he's a good planner as well as a good prayer.
Oh, I love you mentioning that because in any kind of leadership, organizational leadership, or even if you're discipling someone, uh, I would hate if people ever landed in the spot that like planning is not spiritual. Even go all the way back to Genesis, where God is a God of order, not chaos. Right? We even see the early church and its establishment, and they're going to appoint deacons to serve the widows so that some can pray and some can teach. Like the idea of having an order and a system and a structure, it's almost built into the way that God solves chaos in a sense.
Yeah, and what struck me in chapter 2 is when he finally arrives back in Jerusalem and sees the condition of the walls and the city. He doesn't tell anybody what he's going to do.
Mm,
He plays his cards really close to the chest.
hmm
He doesn't want to engender a lot of rumors and false and opposition. So he does personal survey of the walls to see what is going to take place. It's all a part of
Yep.
his planning. Then when he's ready, he's not assuming, he's got his facts. Then he calls the people together and says, uh, "We can do this. God is with us," and he tells them the evidence of God's hand by saying, "Look what this is, the very king who told us to stop the work on the
Mm,
walls. He's the God. He's the king who doesn't even believe in the God we believe in, but he provided for me. He gave permission. Not only that, he sent wood. He sent troops to protect us. He gave evidence and confirmation that this is what God was doing. I think that just, I think that gripped the hearts of people, and they said,
hmm
eh, I think we can do this. Let's
Right.
do it. Let's do it.
Um, in that, I think I remember, maybe it was last year or another time, you kind of drew this principle and idea, this leadership reality that Nehemiah was going to see the problem for himself. Right? He
Yeah.
didn't send people out and then trust their assessment of the problem. How do you take that principle or that leadership idea and really flesh it out in real time? Or what are some
Eh,
examples for that you've done?
Here's one illustration, perhaps. You're sitting with someone, you're talking with them, and you assume you know what their problem is,
Hmm.
or you assume they know the issue, and you don't realize or you forget the presenting problem is often not the real problem.
Hmm.
So you just jump to assumptions rather than doing the careful work of listening yourself, getting the information, or you hear about some other person that's negative or they're critical or there's a marriage problem here, and you jump right in without getting the facts. And Nehemiah doesn't do that. He's
Mm-hmm.
just very careful to personally to know what's going on so that he can lead the people with integrity. That's the other thing about Nehemiah is
Mm.
just this integrity of the man.
Yep. And I was, along a similar line, was thinking how many times is our perspective of a person shaped by the perspective of someone else about that person
Right.
versus, like you're saying, getting in, doing the meeting, asking great questions. There was that whole idea in counseling of conceptualization, which is essentially keep asking questions because you can actually conceptualize what's truly going on. And
Yeah.
I think that's part of what Nehemiah is doing out there. He's asking himself questions about the state of the wall and the state of the people and what's it going to take, but he can't rely on secondhand information to get the job done.
Exactly. I think as he's riding his horse around the wall, and actually came to a place where he couldn't ride anymore, there's so much rubble. He's looking it over. Thinking we've got to do this first, and then we'll take that
Mm,
part of the wall, and I could put people here. Uh, the project was tremendous. 10 feet tall, 4 5 feet wide, and maybe 2.5 miles around the city.
well,
If he had just asked someone else, "What do you think?" They would have said, as they had done for 100 years, "We can't do it." I
can't
think
do it.
Nehemiah, riding around the city, said, "We can do this. It's going to take a lot of work, and here's where we'll start."
Hmm.
He knew exactly where to start.
Back to that prayer in chapter one, he mentioned at the end, and give me good success. How is Nehemiah defining success?
By completing or accomplishing what God has given him to do.
Hmm.
He fasts, he prays, heart is broken. He is absolutely shattered. One of the things I said in the class was we often know what God's on our life is by what breaks our heart.
Mm,
What is it? We come to the point of saying, this cannot go on.
mm,
And whether you're in vocational ministry or you're working and you're discipling people, the, the the area that God is calling you to is often the area where your heart is broken. So Nehemiah's prayer for success is based on the one thing that has to happen because he's determined, he feels God is leading him to do this, but he has to have confirmation.
sure.
That, and so he prays for success in that sense.
And part of that confirmation, which is almost the way God works, Genesis to Revelation, this counterintuitive reality that a pagan king is going to fund the the wall project in Jerusalem.
Yeah, and Nehemiah actually says, I'd like you to send soldiers with me. I want you to set me free from my responsibilities. He's the cupbearer of the king, which means the king's life depends on him, his integrity. You just can't get away. And he appears sad before the king, and the king doesn't need more sadness from his servants than he's got from everyone else. He takes this
Sure.
huge risk. Um, he's planned and he's prepared. Just an amazing, once again, amazing example of a man listening to God, doing the planning, and determining if I take this one log out, the whole log jam will float downstream.
Mm,
That's the log, and that's
hmm
that's the success he's praying for.
And what's maybe lost on us just historically is that's not a minor detail in the text where it tells us he appeared as sad or his face was fallen in the presence of the king. There's a taking his life. There's a risk there, and even showing that emotional reality in the king's presence.
Yeah, in fact, he said, "I was very much afraid," and I love this guy is human
Mm,
because this is his journal. He's actually writing that, saying, I was afraid the king could take my head off at that point."
hmm
Uh, but when the king says, "Well, what is it you want?" and he is ready to go, but the man is human. You see his anger flash out from time to time, especially in the last chapter of the book where he said, "I beat some people and pulled their hair." The man is just human, and but he's channeling his anger in a way that's I think that's appropriate. And all along the way, he's saying, "Lord, just remember me. This is
mm.
hard. These people are so stubborn. Just remember the work I'm doing, Lord."
Yeah, and I mean, are you familiar with the that book by Marshall and Payne, Trellis and the Vine?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, so I think you think about Nehemiah and Ezra almost working together with this kind of trellis and vine reality of one of them's rebuilding a wall and one of them's rebuilding the people, but it's not quite that distinct because in building the wall, Nehemiah is building the people, but only in as much as they are engaged in the work. Does
yeah.
that make sense? Like no one's growing or being built internally if they're not getting their hands going externally. And I think there's a discipleship reality in that for us.
I took a I took a guy who is an executive vice president of a very large company here in Memphis on a mission trip to the Dominican Republic.
Okay.
And he was down in a ditch, digging a ditch for a latrine at a Haitian village. Here's this guy, he has patents on various devices, fabulously successful. He's got his shirt off and he's digging a ditch. And I walked up and I said, "How you doing?" And he said, "Man, I am loving this."
Mm.
That trip launched him into a spiritual search that ended up in his wife being baptized, taking that step of obedience, and him actually
Wow.
becoming one of our elders.
Wow.
But it began with just the action of working and serving in a way that was totally out of his comfort zone.
And even to back up from that, that started by either the Lord putting it on your heart or whomever. Like he was invited into something that maybe hadn't crossed his mind previously. And at some level, as we're walking with people spiritually, uh, I was studying, I don't know, earlier this year, Sam, and it occurred to me that almost everyone that comes to Jesus with the disciples, they're coming through invitation. And I went back and started reading and noticed how intentional Jesus is to invite people in. And looking at that and going, I think so many people in our churches or in our Christian communities, even if they don't know it, they really are waiting for someone to look them in the eye or walk beside them and invite them into something.
I'm mentoring a young pastor in Arkansas, a small church. I actually did a float trip with a bunch of guys, and he was part of it. We got to talking. I was so impressed by. Yeah, I think he has a bright future in serving the Lord.
Hmm.
So he called me and he said, "Would you kind of very occasionally meet with me?" I said, "Let's do this. Let's meet every once a week by telephone." And I invited. I said, "I see so much in you,
Mm,
and I'm for you, and I want to be a real friend to you." And this is he tells me over and over. He said, "I'm keeping a notebook, all the things that I'm learning, and I'm just sharing out of my. I can tell him more things that don't work than work, more of my failures." But I think you're right. I think we broadcast and we say we need somebody down in the preschool area.
mm,
If we go to individually a person and say, "Would you serve for a couple of weeks down here? And here's what we'll provide. We're not going to leave you stuck down there." I think people will respond. I assume that people want to serve the Lord.
yeah, that's a great assumption. I think in my cynicism, I might trend towards thinking they don't at some points, and that's a good reminder. But that's what I love about Nehemiah. It's almost like he intuitively knows that calling people into a work greater than themselves and doing it with others, right? So these people working on the wall, they're not on an island. Somebody's laying bricks and somebody's got a sword, and these different parts are being played to bring this whole project to fruition. Man, there's so many pastoral and just Christian principles that rise out of how he goes about this work.
Yeah, and they're not experts in building. They're politicians and jewelers and craftsmen. What do they know about building? What does
Mm,
Nehemiah know about building?
mm,
He's serving at the king's palace, tasting wine and eating the food, and maybe being the counselor to the king. He he doesn't know anything, but he's
yeah,
launching into something way out of his comfort zone.
it's a great point.
I think when we challenge people and we say, "Go with me, we'll do it together," uh,
Hmm.
people take giant steps forward spiritually when they're put out of their comfort zone. Which is why I like to take people on mission trips,
Mm.
and they're scared to death, and yet they come back and their mind is different, their heart has changed.
And in that, you just wonder. I could see Nehemiah, whatever. It's 2024, and he's out here in Austin, and the wall's fallen, and he's got to rebuild it, and he's going around all the churches. And I wonder how many of us would say, "I'm not gifted in that. I don't know anything about that." Right? And this whole idea of I'm not gifted in X, Y, and Z becomes a there is gifting, but then there's also duty and calling and service. How do you help people process those distinctions?
I love the way that I've heard Ronnie Stevens say this from time to time. He would say, God doesn't call the gifted, he gifts the called.
Hmm.
He equips the called.
Hmm.
And I think at any point, the Lord can give gifts to us.
Sure.
He can enable us. And I think we'll find out if we jump into something that not only is there joy,
Hmm.
but we're effective in doing something that wasn't even on the radar for us. I don't
Yeah.
think we challenge people enough. I don't think
Hmm.
I really don't. Sometimes I feel as a pastor, okay, that's all I'm doing is challenging people,
Sure.
but it's to, hand out bulletins on Sunday morning. Well, yeah, somebody, and that's nothing wrong with that. That's not
Hmm.
demeaning in any way. Go to Cuba with me and meet
Hmm.
with 50 young adults who are seeking your profession and just share with them. Boy, that's mind boggling.
Yeah.
Turns their heart upside down.
Sure. But has infinitely more potential to impact them and change them.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And I love what Nehemiah says when he gathers the people. He says, let's do this.
That's right.
We
We're going to do it together.
That's an invitation and we'll do it together.
And that's part of the reason why you can bolster yourself against discouragement is if others are in it with you.
So many times when my when I've been discouraged, my wife will say, "Well, hey, lean on my faith."
Hmm.
And when she's been discouraged, I have said to her, "Look, lean on my faith." We had one of our children got into a lot of stuff, and I kept saying, I'm going to go rescue him." "No, you can't," she said.
Hmm.
And when she came to the point of saying, "I can't stand any longer, I've got to go," I said, "No, we got to let God work here." And now
Hmm.
that he's serving as a pastor, but
No, well,
boy, the Lord never meant for us to face discouragement alone.
no, and it's crushing, right? I mean, when you get alone in that, and it's even more crushing when the discouragement comes from the ones that you thought you were in it with. Those are some of the biggest blows. Hey, before we got a few more minutes here. I want to circle into the end of the book because right, he's Nehemiah's this whole spectrum of leadership: prayer, fasting, calling people, incarnational leadership, all of these things. And yet, and you already mentioned this, he gets really angry with some folks, and he expresses it and calls it to account, and there are consequences that come with it. Uh, how do we take that piece, that frustration piece, and put it into play in godly ways, and not just be like this idea of, well, all Christians are just nice, and we don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, and we don't want to call anybody to account. Like, help us walk that tension.
Well, Nehemiah apparently never knew the 11th commandment, "Thou shalt be nice." he uh, but he holds people accountable is what he does. They had made a covenant that they would do various things. He leaves, comes back, and they're back in their old ways. And
Yep.
he tells the people, "This is why we got into trouble in the first place.
Mm,
What is wrong?" Um, and he takes some pretty drastic action. Probably part of that is cultural in
mm,
that particular uh, culture. But sometimes we don't hold people accountable. We just kind of, well, that's just, we slough it off. But they made solemn commitments, and he walked them back through it. And he showed them the consequences if they
yeah.
continue down this route, what's going to happen. At one
Yeah.
point, he becomes very angry and he says, "But I took counsel with myself." He doesn't
Mm,
explode. He
mm,
he's angry. He's going to talk to the nobles about how they're ripping people off, but he takes time to process what's the best thing. Tim Keller has helped me to know, when you're angry, ask the question, why am I angry? What's making me angry?
mm,
Is it worth this? And I think
yeah.
that's what Nehemiah is doing.
No, yeah, no, that's a great word on that. Taking count of yourself and why. Why am I angry? What do you think, if anything, is there in the anger? Because, and this is what I wonder about in our more individualized Western cultures. I mean, I know you got a son serving in Spain, you've been in the DR, you've been in some cultures that are a little less individualistic than what we have
Yeah.
here. Uh, if someone in Nehemiah's day is really not fulfilling that covenant, it doesn't just affect the individual. They're putting the entire community at risk. And in a sense, in our churches, yeah, if you've got a professing member that's out there sleeping around or cheating on his wife, you do put the reputation of Jesus in the church at stake. But I just wonder, is our accountability less because we are a little bit more individualistic and we don't see the reality of it affecting the community at large?
We don't see it, but it is affecting the community.
Sure.
Someone says if one church member's spiritual temperature goes down, you lower the temperature of the entire
Mm,
uh, church. Never never underestimate. I think I may have said this. Never underestimate the damage that one person out of the will of God can do in a group of people.
hmm.
Maybe what we're seeing in Nehemiah's anger is kind of that 400 BC expression, church discipline. That's what he's doing.
Yeah, sure.
He's very serious. You took vows of commitment. You've broken those vows.
Mm,
This place is about to explode or it's about to die. You're
mm,
letting the enemy right into the camp here,
that's
and
right.
this will not continue. He dons the hat or the mantle of the bishop and says, "This is not going to continue."
That's right. Sam, I want to say thank you, but first, want to just let everybody know, hey, this is what's so great about the Downline Institute is learning so much Bible from wonderful teachers like Sam. And this is only, Sam does Nehemiah in 2 hours. We did a 30-minute flyover here. And so just for the richness and depth and your time here on the podcast, thanks a ton, man.
It's a pleasure. It really is.
All right. Hope I get to see you soon, and best of luck there in Arkansas.
Thank you. Look forward to seeing you, having coffee sometime soon.
That's right. See ya.